Sergeant Jeff Pyle on the right is standing next to Detective Brian Koopman from the Loveland Police Department while they do checks on registered sex offenders. Sergeant Pyle wrote an affidavit about Brian Koopman. We'll go into more detail as this video progresses, but for now, let's start this way. Sergeant Pyle swears under oath, "As an employee of the Loveland Police Department, I am also acquainted with blank, also an officer with the Loveland Police Department at the time. Blank told me that blank believed Koopman was dishonest, and blank would not sign anything Koopman worked on because blank did not trust him." Today is April 15th, 2025. If you're following the lawsuit against Sheriff Justin Smith, you will remember that I was here just a week ago and I explained that I don't come down here to file these documents in the Sheriff John Feyen and Sheriff Justin Smith lawsuits because I like to drive to Denver. It's because as a pro se litigant, I am required to walk into the Supreme Court building, into the clerk's office, and hand file everything I do. That also means that if I need to get a document from the court, I also have to drive to Denver to get those documents. Not very efficient when you think about the time and the money involved for that. So today I'm filing the reply brief in the lawsuit against John Feyen. John Feyen's being sued in his official capacity as the Assistant Chief of Police at FortCollins Police Services, and also in his individual capacity. So this video, I'm not going to bore you with the legal aspects of today's filings, but what we're going to talk about today is exactly why John Feyen was elected to be Larimer County Sheriff, even though he has decades of illegal, unconstitutional actions under his badge. What that means is that the voters in Larimer County were misled, they were deceived, they were tricked into voting for John Feyen, in spite of the fact that they had a clean cop that was running against John Feyen. Jeff Fisher was that officer who had a clean record. He was lied about during the campaign. Brian Koopman, the notorious Brady Cop from the Loveland Police Department, helped get John Feyen elected. And that should be your first red flag. There are numerous red flags, but that's a pretty big red flag. The fact that Brian Koopman was actively supporting John Feyen during his campaign for sheriff tells you who's connected to whom. The campaign for sheriff included two Republican candidates, Jeff Fisher and John Feyen. The next video clip is taken from a public forum where Fisher and Feyen are asked questions by audience members. Listen closely to the question.
We'll start out with you on this one. Have you ever been sued in your official capacity as a law enforcement officer for violating citizens' state or federal constitutional rights, or a tort claim such as excessive force or assault? And that's for both of you. Yep.
No.
As of April 21st, 2025, Jeff Fisher has never been sued in his 32-year career as a law enforcement officer.
Yes.
Would you like to expand?
Oh, okay. Well, that wasn't part of the question. Yep, absolutely.
I added some more to it.
Oh, you added more to it? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. Actually, I was sued by the same person twice for the same thing, and both times it was dismissed.
That's a lie. John Feyen knew he was lying when he told the voters that he had been sued by the same person twice for the same thing. That's the first of many lies that John Feyen tells during this campaign event. At that point in 2022, John Feyen had been sued twice by two different people. I sued John Feyen one time in federal district court because he and Sheriff Justin Smith, along with County Attorney David Arode, conspired to conceal the records of the GPS tracking device that John Feyen attached to my SUV without a warrant. That GPS tracker was on my SUV for at least 4 months. John Feyen says absolutely nothing about those facts when the voters asked him about his history as a cop. Dirty Cop John Feyen also failed to mention his detailed knowledge of this evidence because it didn't fit the story he had to tell to cover up his criminal actions. And, by the way, this evidence was scheduled to be destroyed by the sheriff without my knowledge, but it was preserved until the year 2035 by Larimer County Sheriff's Office investigator Justin Atwood. John Feyen, as the lead officer, knew about this evidence, but he lied about it to get elected. Soon after John Feyen announced his candidacy for the office of sheriff in Larimer County, his partners in deviance, Jeffrey Van Hook and Brian Koopman, began posting on John Feyen's campaign Facebook page. And their target, of course, was Jeff Fisher. Brian Koopman and Jeff Fisher had worked together at the Loveland Police Department, and because Jeff Fisher and his wife, Tammy Fisher, who was also a Loveland Police Department officer, because the Fishers were honest officers, they became targets of Brian Koopman. Brian Koopman begins by attacking a man named Charles Oster. Koopman's tactics include, historically, accusing the person telling the truth of being a liar. It's a trick that liars use, deviant cops use all the time. Twist the facts around so that the honest cop or the honest person is being made out to be the liar. So during the campaign, Jeff Fisher had offered to show his personnel file to anyone who asked. And it's ironic that John Feyen would support Brian Koopman, considering Brian Koopman's sordid history as a law enforcement officer. At this time, he was Brady listed in Weld County. He had been sued numerous times for attacking innocent people in the Loveland community. And one particular case that Brian Koopman brings up in John Feyen's campaign is an active case right now that Brian Koopman was the lead detective on. Sometime after John Feyen was deposed in the lawsuit against him for defamation per se actual malice, Brian Koopman's Facebook comments were deleted. This is how that post looks today, April 21st, 2025. Brian Koopman's comments have been removed. In the case that Brian Koopman throws down on John Feyen's campaign page, Koopman falsely accuses Jeff Fisher of lying in an official police investigation. Koopman falsely accuses Jeff Fisher of lying about his wife tipping off a child pornography suspect. And Koopman falsely accuses Tammy Fisher of tipping off a child pornography suspect. That case that Koopman uses to get dirty cop John Feyen elected as sheriff is the same case that includes sworn testimony by a computer forensic expert that exposed Brian Koopman for altering the evidence in the case. You can watch the video on YouTube, Facebook, and X that shows the evidence of Koopman's illegal actions. That video was posted on the April 18, 2025 post, and that matches this opening screen.
The trained forensics examiner would not do those kinds of activities because of the best practices that I talked about before. Original evidence was modified by those actions. So somebody messed with the computer before it was sent to forensics, and there's the proof.
And remember what did Detective Koopman tell the lab?
He said there was nothing on... God, it just dawned on me. He said there was nothing on the computer. And now suddenly there's something on the computer after he said there was nothing on the computer. Unbelievable.
In this article from 2012, Brian Koopman admits to plugging a flash drive into computers owned by sex offenders, in spite of not having a warrant to do so. The Reporter Herald article from 2012 says that Brian Koopman regularly plugged a flash drive into sex offenders' computers without having search warrants to do so. In 2023, Stan Romanek's computer forensic expert testified that a USB drive was plugged into the computer that had no evidence of child pornography before a thumb drive with the initials BK was plugged in. Since 2012, when Brian Koopman boasted to the public that he was searching computers without warrants, while at the same time altering the evidence, how many computers do you think Brian Koopman has altered the evidence on during his searches without warrants? Let's go back to Sergeant Jeff Pyle's sworn affidavit. Pyle swears under oath in the lawsuit against Brian Koopman that was filed by Tammy Fisher. Tammy Fisher sued Koopman because Koopman falsely accused Fisher of tipping off a child pornography suspect. Koopman falsely accused Fisher because Koopman knew that he was framing the defendant in that child pornography case, and Koopman needed another cop to back his frame job. When Koopman found out that Tammy Fisher was clean and did not tip off the suspect, then Koopman went after Jeff Fisher. More on that in a moment. In the opening paragraphs of Sergeant Jeff Pyle's affidavit, he swears that he is a co-worker of Detective Brian Koopman and that he is aware of the facts involved in this case because he is acquainted with and a friend of the plaintiff Tammy Fisher and her husband Jeff Fisher. We'll talk more about why there is a photo from Pamela Dickman of the Loveland Reporter Herald in a moment. But for now, let's focus on what Pyle says next. Pyle says, I asked Brian if Tammy admitted she tipped off the Romaneks about his search warrant. Brian said, quote, no, she didn't, but she did make some admissions, end quote. Now, this is the important thing to know about Brian Koopman. Brian Koopman has a history of changing the narrative, altering the record, altering the evidence, and he repeatedly makes statements about what a suspect or a friend or a family member of that suspect has said. But it's not accurate. He twists the words of the people that he is supposedly quoting. The truth is that Tammy made no admissions during her interrogation that was done by Brian Koopman. In paragraph 4 of Sergeant Pyle's sworn affidavit, he says, I asked Brian if he had talked with the district attorney's office about filing charges against Tammy. Brian said he had talked with the district attorney's office and they said no. I said to Brian, so then you're done, right? Brian stated something to the effect of, but they came up with something pretty creative and said they were going to no-file the official misconduct charges based on statute of limitation, or something to that effect, against her. Pyle continues, that doesn't mean anything, to which Brian responded, yes, but she'll probably lose her job because Cliff has to notify her boss and the county. What this means is that Brian Koopman knew that Tammy Fisher was innocent, but he also knew that he had to find some other officer who would back up his frame job of Stan Romanek. So he falsely accuses Tammy Fisher of tipping off a child porn suspect, Stan Romanek, and in doing so, he worked with District Attorney Cliff Riedel to fabricate a case against Tammy Fisher. The fact that the no-file was implemented in Tammy Fisher's case means that her bosses, the Larimer County, had to be told about the case. And Brian Koopman knew that that would destroy Tammy Fisher's credibility and that her work in law enforcement and in the judicial system would come to an end. Brian Koopman knew that. Sergeant Pyle finishes his sworn affidavit from August of 2015 this way. As an employee of the Loveland Police Department, I am also acquainted with blank, also an officer with the Loveland Police Department at the time. Blank told me that blank believed Koopman was dishonest and blank would not sign anything Koopman worked on because blank did not trust him. Now, Sergeant Pyle and the police officer that he refers to in paragraph 5 are not the only officers who have sworn under oath about Brian Koopman's pattern of dishonesty. In fact, defense attorneys have also put on the record Brian Koopman's dishonesty. Tammy Fisher sued Brian Koopman for knowingly and with deliberate indifference to constitutional rights, initiated an invalid criminal investigation against her without probable cause and with false statements in an affidavit, and unlawfully and maliciously attempted prosecution of her. In Tammy Fisher's lawsuit against Brian Koopman, she says, pursuant to his investigation into both Plaintiff Fisher and Lisa and Stan Romanek, Defendant Koopman submitted sworn affidavits for both the arrest of Mr. Romanek and search of his residence. Relying on false statements in his affidavit and the unsupported assumptions made in regard to Plaintiff Tammy Fisher, Defendant Koopman also submitted to the Larimer County District Attorney a request to file a charge of second-degree official misconduct, a request the District Attorney eventually declined. Also in Tammy Fisher's lawsuit against Detective Brian Koopman, she says, Defendant Koopman has also confided in another Loveland police employee of rank within the police department that plaintiff would not be arrested, but that he, Koopman, Daniel McDonald, and Cliff, Larimer County District Attorney's Office, had to be creative to come up with something, exhibiting both a conscious guilty knowledge of the nature of his conduct but also a conspiratorial aspect to it. The Public Defender's Office represented Leroy Wallace in the homicide of Christina Gray. Brian Koopman repeatedly, knowingly, and intentionally lied about the evidence in that homicide. When Koopman got caught lying about the evidence, he blamed police officer Paul Areola. The motions that were filed by the public defenders with Judge Julie Coons Field contained explicit details about Brian Koopman's intentional lies. For example, the public defenders say, this case shows that his testimony was not merely biased or inconsistent. Detective Koopman should be held accountable for his dishonest answers under oath at the preliminary hearing in this case. In addition to liability for perjury, Detective Koopman should be found incredible as a matter of law based on his testimony at the preliminary hearing in this case. And regardless of the particular method of the deceit or his reasons therefor, the court should take affront to the fraud perpetrated on the court by Detective Koopman. The record makes clear that there was no misunderstanding about the content of those questions, just as there is no misunderstanding the fact that Detective Koopman's answers to the questions about the Walgreens video in this case were dishonest. The public defenders continue, it is without dispute that the Walgreens at 37th and Garfield in Loveland is not the Walgreens that is relevant to the investigation in this case. And this evidence was apparently in Detective Paul Areola's possession for more than a year without being logged into evidence in this case. The relevant Walgreens surveillance video brings to light disturbing revelations about Detective Koopman's testimony at the preliminary hearing in this case, during which time the court relied upon Detective Koopman's recitation of what he personally observed in that video footage when the court found probable cause for both originally filed charge in this case and bound Mr. Wallace over for trial on those 2 counts. In either event, Detective Koopman fabricated testimony and evidence about activity concerning Miss Gray and Mr. Wallace. He fabricated testimony and evidence concerning a predicate act that was one of the 2 necessary bases for the stalking charge in this case, and he fabricated testimony and evidence concerning facts that, if they had been true, certainly could have been relied upon for evidence of deliberation and intent on the first-degree murder charge in this case. Mr. Wallace also does not leave within a minute of Miss Gray, as Detective Koopman testified under oath based on his personal review of the video footage. In fact, Mr. Wallace does not enter the Walgreens store until 5 minutes after Miss Gray leaves. Detective Ariola's report does not mention that Mr. Wallace can clearly be seen on the Walgreens surveillance footage buying a pack of cigarettes. This is also in direct contradiction with Detective Koopman's sworn testimony based on his personal review of the video footage in this case. Based on a review of the newly provided Walgreens videos from the relevant store at the relevant times, it is clear that Detective Koopman described events he could not possibly have seen on the video surveillance footage from Walgreens, because the video surveillance footage from Walgreens shows none of the activity that Detective Koopman described under oath while answering questions from both the prosecution and defense counsel. It was the Leroy Wallace homicide case that led to Brian Koopman's felony charge in July of 2015. Koopman was prosecuted by the Weld County District Attorney's Office, the 19th Judicial District. Koopman's trial was in April of 2016, and he was acquitted because the jury was blocked from seeing facts and evidence from years of wrongdoing as a cop. Desperate to take down Stan Romanek, Brian Koopman had to find a way to make his case stick. His first target was Tammy Fisher. Koopman interrogated Tammy Fisher after the raid of Stan Romanek's house, where no evidence of child pornography was located. As the months pass after the raid and Stan Romanek has still not been charged with any crimes, Brian Koopman tries another route to make his frame job stick. So he goes after Jeff Fisher. That interrogation is done just before the arrest of Stan Romanek. Brian Koopman doubled down on his frame job of Tammy Fisher by using fellow officer Scott Hyland. Koopman wanted the Fishers to admit that they told Stan Romanek to use CCleaner because years prior, Officer Scott Hyland used CCleaner on the Fishers' home computer. Brian Koopman uses tricks like that, multiple layers of he said, she said lies about department officers to try to get someone to say something that he can use to back up his own false accusations. When Koopman was being prosecuted for felony lying under oath, I received an anonymous letter in my post office box that I immediately provided to the Weld County District Attorney's Office. It was Weld County, the 19th Judicial District, that prosecuted Brian Koopman, in part because Cliff Riedel and other DAs in the 8th Judicial District in Larimer County were colluding with Koopman to cover up his illegal patterns. At the time I received that anonymous letter, I knew that it was from an officer or someone close to an officer because of the level of accuracy about cases mentioned in the letter. But it was not until March of 2025, 10 years later, that I was able to put together and verify a vital statement in the anonymous letter from 10 years prior. That Koopman was alone with Romanek's computer after it was seized in the search warrant raid. We also know from computer forensic experts that testified in 2023 that, in fact, Romanek's computer was shut down days after the raid, and that a USB drive with the initials BK was responsible for altering the evidence in Stan Romanek's computer. When Brian Koopman was told by the forensic computer expert on scene at the raid that Stan Romanek's computers had no evidence of child porn, Koopman had to find another way to take down his target. That is why Koopman went after Tammy Fisher, because he thought he could lie about things that were not true and make Tammy Fisher admit to it. When Koopman realized trying to trick Tammy Fisher into lying failed, he went after Jeff Fisher. Days passed between Koopman's interrogation of Tammy Fisher and when he interrogated Jeff Fisher. Koopman intentionally uses delays in his investigations because it helps him get away with lying. Koopman knows that alibi witnesses or alibi evidence disappears quickly, and he also relies on the inadequacy of the unreliability of human memory. So Brian Koopman thought he could trip up Jeff and Tammy Fisher or catch them in a lie. But Koopman failed. Koopman failed to trip up the Fishers because they were telling the truth about their innocence, and the Fishers had no problem keeping track of the facts. But Brian Koopman did succeed at destroying Tammy Fisher's reputation by conspiring with District Attorney Cliff Riedel to be, quote, creative in using a no-file case against her. And Koopman's made-up case against Tammy Fisher and bogus investigation into Jeff Fisher's involvement caused Jeff Fisher to be bypassed for a promotion to lieutenant. When Brian Koopman was interrogating Jeff Fisher about the Stan Romanek child pornography case, Brian Koopman expressed disappointment that Stan Romanek had not gone to the media and made a big show about how he was arrested. Which brings me to this section. Brian Koopman has a pattern of calling media outlets to attend no-knock raids, arrest situations, contacting suspects. He asked the media to come with him to photograph it. This is one of those examples where here we have Sergeant Jeff Pyle with Detective Brian Koopman during what they call Operation Shepherd. But there's more about Brian Koopman and his thirst for publicity. Brian Koopman's tricks of twisting the words of others and turning it into lies is extremely difficult to undo because people are drawn to drama, but they often won't take the time to learn the facts. This is one reason why it is so important to file lawsuits that will correct the record, and so that investigators are able to track patterns and learn how corruption works. The United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit reversed the district court dismissal in the lawsuit Jeremy Myers versus Brian Koopman. And sometimes third parties like federal district courts or federal courts can summarize a case better than anyone. So in this particular case, the court says, Myers' allegations paint a compelling picture of overzealous police work. Detective Koopman falsified an affidavit to obtain a search warrant for Myers' property. Acting under authority of the warrant, law enforcement officers searched his property and a nearby sugar beet laboratory. Investigators discovered a jar containing a white substance. Field tests incorrectly identified the substance as methamphetamine. The police hailed the seizure as, quote, a lot of dope, and the media portrayed Myers as a meth manufacturer. According to Myers' allegations, Koopman then fabricated facts in an affidavit to obtain an arrest warrant. Since 2007, the city of Loveland has known that felony charge Detective Brian Koopman, now Brady listed in 3 Colorado counties, was repeatedly, intentionally, and willfully violating policies and the law. Forced to retire Police Chief Luke Hecker, the city of Loveland, and the 8th Judicial District Attorney's Office all possess the knowledge and the authority to stop Brian Koopman from hurting innocent people. They refused. In Myers v. Koopman, we learn in simple terms what happened to Jeremy Myers because of Brian Koopman's dirty deeds. Quote, the jar of white substance removed from the building was hailed as, quote, a lot of dope, end quote, by one of the officers present, anxious to capture a headline in the local newspaper. He at least achieved that goal, and Koopman and his team were more than glad to allow the media to develop front-page stories touting Jeremy Myers' major meth lab and criminal activity. Even when the records are in their own words, when they sign and swear to their own records, that does not stop them from lying about what they've said. Brian Koopman knows it is improper to have news reporters on scene during searches, raids, and arrests. But that impropriety does not stop Brian Koopman because he wants to be in the spotlight. However, when he is forced to testify under oath about his lust for attention, Koopman ducks and weaves. Pause the video if you want to read each page to see how Koopman avoids the question. It's not just the attention that Koopman craves from the publicity. Koopman has a pattern of humiliating, mocking, taunting, and ridiculing the people he targets. Using the media to double down on this humiliation is one of the most effective ways to negatively impact a suspect. The transcript used here is with permission of the defendant under the condition of anonymity. This is not about hating cops. This is about my respect and my honoring of the clean cops, for the men and women in uniform who have guns and badges and know how to follow the law when they use those guns and badges. To get John Feyen elected, Brady listed Dirty Cop Brian Koopman, lied about clean cops Jeff Fisher and Tammy Fisher. To get himself elected, John Feyen lied about his own criminal actions with the GPS tracking device, and he lied about legal cases that are filled with evidence that proves he is unfit for the office of sheriff. Every victim of systemic injustice and intentional crimes by cops have been forced to watch their friends and families suffer. The damage is multi-generational. The past, the present, and the future are forever altered.
Yeah, he says, how old is Gramps today? I said, 66. He said, so am I.
Oh, my goodness.
And he spelled it H-A-P-Y, so he had to scrape it off.
Oh.
H-A-P-Y?
Instead of H-A-P-P-Y. And I said, it doesn't matter, it's the thought that counts. He says, you're right, there are so many more important
Yeah, I
things.
can see that scraped off spot.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, ready to sing?
Why did he spell it H-A-P-Y?
Because he said it was the Monday before Thanksgiving, and he was really tired. Okay, ready? Happy birthday.
We'll sing it.
Okay, go ahead.
Happy,
You start.
Happy? Go on.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Graham. Happy birthday to you.
Blow it out, blow it out.
You want me to?
Yeah. Can I?
You can help me on this one. I'll blow on this one.
Okay.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Now. Twice? It took you 2 times?
For one candle?
Oh, man. That's great, Jaden. Thank you so much. Goodness.
It is impossible to describe the loss of a light-filled child at the hands of an unclean cop. But exponentially multiply that pain of losing an angel like this by the thousands of people that have been stripped of their loved ones because of Brian Koopman, John Feyen, Justin Smith, and all of the corrupt officials who are helping them get away with their crimes.
I like Serena.
What are you doing?
Recording her. Her motor's really loud. What? Oh, careful, Lovey. She's just giving you love. She just can't get enough of you. Look at that.
Yeah,
My goodness.
She's having fun. She's having fun.
She was reaching out with her paw.
My goodness, she might. Oops. Ooh, hold on, kitty.
Oh, she loves you so
Look at
much.
that, Jane. Hold
That's the
still.
kind of kitty I want.
Hold still. Hold still. She's just so happy to see you.
Oh, look.
Boy, look at her. She's not skittish at all. And she's purring. She's purring so loud.
Yeah.
Wow. Can you believe that? She's so happy to get out of that cage at the store.
So happy you got her.
Oh my goodness, I wasn't expecting that. You're going to do it again.
Get up on me. Yeah.
Well, how do you think Granny's going to like that when she's cooking eggs and the little kitty runs right up her back and sits on her shoulder?
Oh no, you don't.
Look,
Oh no,
Jaden, hold still. She just wants to love you.
Let her rub on your leg. That's what she wants. That's what real kitties do, is rub up against you.
Look.
Oh, awesome.
Oh no, you go.
She really wants to stay close to you, Jaden.
Oh no.
That's exactly what I want.
She's going to in the house.
Yeah, thanks. Don't let her go in that closet. That would be a disaster.